Welcome to Healing Words, a show that explores the connection between writing and health, brought to you by the Center for Humanities in Medicine at Mayo Clinic. I'm your host, Jacquelyn Fletcher, and I'm an author and a founding faculty member of Mayo's Creative Writing at the Bedside program. I've worked with patients on everything from fictional stories and personal essays to poems and letters to family members. On each episode of Healing Words, I'll be chatting with authors to discover how writing can powerfully transform your emotional, physical, and spiritual well-being. We'll also hear from authors who are going to read selections from their own work. And at the end of each show, I'll offer you some writing prompts so you can explore writing for yourself and see if it's something that might help you before, during, or after your experience with illness. You can use your own notebook, or you can ask your nurse to contact the Center for Humanities in Medicine, and our staff will bring you one. Now today I'm talking with Dr. Rafael Campo, and I am so excited. Dr. Campo teaches and practices general internal medicine at Harvard Medical School and Beth Deaconess Medical Center in Boston. But he's also a poet with a number of award-winning poetry books and several collections of essays, including The Healing Art, A Doctor's Black Bag of Poetry, The Desire to Heal, and his most recent book of poems, The Enemy. Now, this is an extremely busy man. He's also on the faculty of the Lesley University Creative Writing Master of Fine Arts program. Dr. Campo, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here with you.
Well, to get us started, I wanted to read a quote that you wrote for a statement when you joined the Board of Trustees at Amherst College. Mm-hmm. That's your alma mater.
Correct, yes.
So you said, "I believe the stories we tell, as much as the medicines we swallow, do help us to heal." That's a pretty powerful statement. So I would love to hear why you think stories can heal. How?
Well, I think that we are creatures of language, first and foremost, I think. And I think our language really is what allows us to connect so powerfully with one another. And in that connection, I think we find where some of the healing power of language resides. In becoming ill, I think oftentimes we find ourselves very isolated from others. We find ourselves disconnected. We sometimes are scared. And through language, through the written word in particular, I believe, we have an opportunity to really connect again with the people around us, the people who are taking care of us, and also to some extent, I would say, even with ourselves. Another thing that illness does is, I think in many cases, alienate us from our own bodies. Our bodies betray us. Mm-hmm. How can this contraption that I've relied on all my life suddenly do this to me? And I think writing can really actually help to relocate us in that disturbed body, in that troubled body, and to help us really gain our bearings again and make sense of what's happening to us. So language is such a powerful medium for connection, I think, not only within ourselves and understanding within ourselves, but with the people around us, and including our physicians, our caretakers. That's a very, very important way to, I think, really communicate with them as well.
Yeah, I love that. Now, do you have examples, specific examples of, in your work with patients that you've either, seen the power of writing and its ability to heal, or in your own life, have you experienced that power?
Yes, I have. In many instances I can think of. What first drew me to writing myself. I remember growing up and being bicultural and in many ways feeling myself different from people around me. In writing, I discovered an opportunity to really make sense of those differences and to reach out across what I found out turns out to be very, very superficial kinds of differences, and really discover shared humanity with the people around me. And similarly, I can think of many instances of patients of mine who have written about the experience of illness, and I think really have been transformed by that. I think of some of my writer friends, in particular, a writer by the name of Eve Sedgwick, who was diagnosed with breast cancer when she was one of my professors at Amherst College, speaking of Amherst. And she ended up writing about her experience of illness and lived, I think, much longer with metastatic breast cancer than she was expected to survive. I think largely because of the creative engagement she felt in writing about her illness. And she to my mind, is one of the most striking examples of how writing really helped her, I think, to heal. And even though in the end it didn't cure her breast cancer, I think ultimately in many important ways she was healed by her writing. And that was something I'll never forget.
Yeah. And you write about her in your books, don't you?
Yes,
Because
yes.
I'm glad you brought her up, because you talk about her and her ability through her writing to empower herself.
Yes.
And by naming what she had through poetry, that was a way for her to wrest control back, from all of these things that were going around her to herself. I just absolutely love that idea of empowerment that comes.
Yes.
And I'd love if you would tell us a little bit about how you think writing empowers patients, specifically who are dealing with an illness and actually staying at Mayo Clinic. Why is this important? I mean, how can writing this down and naming something when you're surrounded by chaos help?
Well, I think in a number of ways, particularly for thinking about certain kinds of illnesses that carry a kind of a stigma with them. And I think about cancer, certainly. I think about HIV infection. These are conditions that sometimes people find very difficult to talk about. And poetry in particular, but I think writing more generally, is a way of speaking, in a sense, the unspeakable, and really finding those words to communicate not only around the specific diagnosis one may be dealing with, but also to help others talk about it with us, and to help us understand together what these conditions mean and what they cause us to feel inside of ourselves. And I think another reason it's important to think about writing is that medicine often, in all its good intentions to help heal, often will take over the narrative, will appropriate the story of the illness. And we, the doctors, start telling the story. We write our notes in the chart. We use all these unfamiliar terms and medicalese, and which is another kind of foreign language perhaps. And that can really, in a way, further isolate or alienate someone who is trying to make sense, him or herself, of what's happening in their bodies. So writing, in my view, is a way of reclaiming that story and really retelling it in one's own voice. And in a sense, exerting one's own authority over what's going to happen, and not just giving over all of the control to the doctors and the medications, and but to really, in a very important way, I think, maintain a kind of control over what is happening to one's body through the imaginative act, through the act of telling, through the act of imagining being well again. And so poetry, narratives more generally, can really provide that for folks who are dealing with illness, I think, very much.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And another thing that you write about a lot is community.
Yes.
And how writing can develop community, and that if you read a poem or if you read a piece of literature that is about someone who is having an illness, that it connects people across cultures, across centuries.
Yes.
And I really loved how you put that. And so, why is community, do you think, important for particularly patients?
Again, I think of so many instances where patients of mine have felt alone in the hospital. They feel like they're the only ones who are going through this kind of experience. And with writing, with acts of the imagination that join us to others, we discover that, wow, other folks have been through this, and there's a kind of wisdom that accumulates through our stories, through our shared narratives, that can help all of us deal with our experiences of illness. And so that person who is alone in the hospital overnight, who might be feeling scared, suddenly has this tremendous resource of other voices, of other comforting presences who can speak to what they've been through themselves. And whether they're stories of survival, whether they're stories of courage, those kinds of stories can, I think, inspire us to call on whatever inner resources we have in ourselves that can abet healing. And we figured out a lot of things in medicine. The biomedical model is very powerful, but we have yet to learn a lot about how the mind and the body interact. And I believe that the imagination can be a tremendous, powerful source of healing for us. And then again, writing helps us tap into that, I think. And by witnessing also how others have overcome the similar experiences that they may have had. Again, that's what a wonderful sort of roadmap to how I might deal with the same or similar troubling kinds of experiences. So.
Yeah, that's so true. And it makes me think about how, you are working day in and day out with patients as a doctor, but you are also connected to this other world where the imagination is something that helps us to heal, both in the hospital setting and outside the hospital setting. And, I would love to know how, your work as a poet, when that began, when that impulse started, and how that fused with your impulse to heal, and then how that then has changed how you deal with patients.
Yes. Well, I can say that pretty early in life I felt different in many ways from folks around me, from people around me, and writing about my own experiences and writing about the country my parents came from, for example, was a way of bridging distances, was a way of, in a sense, repairing fractures that, for me personally, was therapeutic, was actually healing, helped me feel more part of the human family in this larger sense. And so connecting the creative act and healing for me was a very, very early discovery, I guess I would say. And so when I decided to go to medical school, I thought I wanted to bring with me this deep appreciation, this deep sense of the power of imagination and of the arts, of the humanities, of language, to my work as a physician, because I quickly saw in medical school that again, the biomedical narrative, the biomedical story of illness is very, very powerful. And at times, I think, forgets or doesn't recognize the equal power of the human imagination, the human narrative, the stories we tell ourselves about illness. And I remember, thinking about my abuela, who would pray in Spanish to her icon of La Virgencita, the Little Virgin, and that was profoundly healing for her. And some of the medicines that the doctors prescribed for her various ailments, actually harmed her in many ways and caused side effects that may in some ways have shortened her life. And so I remember that juxtaposition always very clearly in my life, and have tried to, as a consequence, honor those stories that my patients tell about their illnesses, and try to really value and incorporate their understanding of illness and the ways in which they seek to heal themselves in the way in which I approach caring for them. So I think, again, the two are, in my experience, inextricably interconnected. I can't imagine the work of being a doctor without language, without poetry, without that kind of healing power in my life as well. And I feel that every interaction I have with a patient really, in some sense, is a form of poetry, is a form of that kind of empathetic connection that is possible really only through language. And I do sometimes feel troubled by some of the changes we see in medicine, where doctors are being asked to spend less time with patients because we have to, we have all these new advances that we have to bring to bear to the treatment of illness, and all of these financial constraints and all of these kinds of pressures that doctors are facing now. And to my mind, really, the most important healing instrument that I have to offer is myself, is my presence, my witnessing, my empathetic listening with the patient who is describing what she's feeling. And I think that's tremendously central to our work, and I hope that is never, ever compromised by some of the changes we're seeing in medicine.
Yeah, well, I hope not either. I mean, I think that what you're talking about, the empathetic response to a patient, is something that I would guess that you're very skilled at. And the reviews of your work that I've read, that's one of the first words that people always write. They're like, empathetic, compassionate, this man is wonderful. And so I would really love to talk a little bit about, people always say about writing, poetry or nonfiction, creative nonfiction, fiction, that it is a way in to see somebody else's experience, and that then can create empathy. It can teach empathy for another human being. And so I would love to hear you talk a little bit about, if you think that writing does create empathy, which it sounds like it does, that you believe that, but also how, and how particularly in a setting like a Mayo Clinic, a hospital where you have pressures, you've got illness, you have speed, you have all of these things. So having that quiet moment for empathy is challenging.
Yes, well, I think, you alluded actually in asking the question to, I think one of the most important ways in which poetry can provide those kinds of quiet moments actually, because in poetry, in reading a text, any kind of a text really, I think we're really, in a very important way, immersing ourselves in another's voice, in another's imagination. And when we do that, we are, in a sense, almost forced to slow down. We have to take the time to listen, to be present, especially, I think, with poetry, where the choices that poets make about language and what words to use are so specific and so crafted and so demanding in many respects, I think, of our attention. And so when we read a poem, I think we're really being asked, and we're asking ourselves to slow down, to exist in the moment, to experience a kind of peace, perhaps, that is all the more necessary in that chaotic hospital environment where people are running in and out and using words that half the time we don't even understand what they're saying. To honor that presence of another consciousness in our own lives, and to wonder also, I think, to be free in a moment to wonder about what we might learn about ourselves, what we might learn about what we're feeling through another person's experiences, is just a wonderful opportunity. So I think it's actually even more important in the hospital environment to try to make that time available. And to me, it's analogous to when a nurse takes a moment and sits down and warms a patient's hand in the ICU. I mean, to me, it's a similar kind of gesture of shared humanity that shouldn't ever be excluded from the hospital, no matter how busy we are. We should always have the time to provide that kind of comfort to one another, because after all, what we're hoping to do is heal. We're hoping, yes, we want to cure the illness, and that's critically important to what we do, but more importantly, I think perhaps we also want to heal, and that to me is a way to connect ourselves with the people around us in that chaotic swirl of actions and what's the next step and what's the next thing to do in the management of this condition, and it's also a way, I think, I want to say one more thing, I think it's also a way of remembering for us as care providers that the people we are taking care of are fellow human beings. It's as important for the doctors and the nurses, I think, as it is for the patients to have this kind of engagement with the work of healing, because we need to remember that this isn't just another case of breast cancer in room 712. This is Mrs. Jones, who has her own particular story, her own particular way she came to her diagnosis, her own particular fears and concerns and worries and joys. And those are all, I think, critically important for us to engage as we try to heal that human being laying in the bed in front of us. So I think it's just as important for care providers, the doctors, the nurses, the social workers, all of us involved in care to be present in this way through the humanities.
I completely agree with you. And I also think that to be present in the moment as a caregiver, to offer that kind of healing connects you with another human being in a way that someday you're going to have to connect with a doctor in the same setting.
Absolutely.
I have to read something here again from your book, The Healing Art. It is important, indeed critically so, for each of us, future patients all, to examine the link between healing and the imagination. That's the truth. We're all future patients. And you know, when I first read that, I was really struck by it because it's a little ominous, but it's also very pragmatic. I mean, it's very practical. It's very practical. I have trouble saying that word today. But I would love to know how you have been preparing as a future patient for your own illness. How do you plan to use writing in your own life?
Well, I think I will use it in the ways in which I've seen so many of my patients use it. I think really journaling, for example, is one very, very powerful way to bring language, to bring the imagination into the experience of illness, even if we might not feel prepared to sit down and write a poem or to write a short story or to write a more crafted kind of writing about what we're experiencing. A journal, just having a pad at the bedside, where you can jot down a word that someone says that you didn't understand, or something that a loved one said that you want to remember, or that is, I think, just such a wonderful first step towards making use of language oneself in dealing with illness. But yes, I do believe we are all patients. We will all become patients, and I think that my own experience of writing, I hope will help me when I become ill myself someday, to really marshal all of those kinds of uses for language that we've been discussing. I think that it's. I always feel there's this phrase that people often use or refer to, physician heal thyself, and I think the experience of medical education and medical training can sometimes be very alienating and dehumanizing, and tends to try to extract the humanity out of us as we go through our education. And so I feel like that in and of itself in many ways has prepared me to make use of writing, because my own writing now, I think, has helped me to heal some of the injuries of that process, and has helped, certainly, I think, to make me a better doctor, to make me a more effective listener, to help me, again, be more present for my patients when they are telling me their stories. And when I listen to their descriptions of their symptoms, I'm at once thinking, of course, of the medical implications, but at the same time, I'm thinking about what a beautiful metaphor that was, the way in which my patient describes how the pain she felt, it was like a cold wind blowing through her chest, and some of those kinds of moments of just sharing in a moment of beauty, even in the context, and perhaps even heightened perhaps by the context of the potential gravity of the situation, is actually just such a wonderful experience of sharing, of being human together. And so I feel that I'm already engaged in a process of self-healing through my writing, and I hope that will continue when I confront illness myself someday.
I know there are going to be people watching this saying, yeah, but you're a writer. So this is easy for you. So I know that I get asked by patients a lot, do you have to be a writer to write?
I would say we are all writers. We are all creatures of language. We all have stories to tell. And I think one of the things that really, again, makes us human is that impulse to share our stories. We want to tell our stories. We want to be heard by others. We want people to witness what we're going through. And I think of my own family, where we have jokes in our family. If you're not crying or laughing or shouting when you say something, then you really didn't mean it. We're very expressive in my family, and I think that's true of many folks, that we have a natural kind of inclination to share, to tell those kinds of stories, and to connect through language in that way. And so it really gets back to some of the things we were talking about in terms of community, in terms of connections, and witnessing. I think it's we all have our stories to tell, and I would encourage everyone listening to our conversation to give that voice a chance. Let it out. give it a little nudge if it needs one. You know, don't let all the things happening around you that do tend to silence us. Don't let them squelch your voice, and see what happens. See what happens when you put that pen to paper, and I bet you'll find that much more is there than you may have anticipated.
Yeah, I would bet that's true, and you know, I think that's a beautiful little segue here, because you know, one of the things we really like to do at Mayo Clinic is to encourage patients, family members, caregivers to really use writing as a strategy for healing. I mean, that's what this whole show has been about. And so I would love if you could provide a nudge today for our patients, our viewers, and offer a writing prompt.
Sure. I do this often with my own patients, and I think it's a wonderful, wonderful way to get started, to have a bit of an assignment or an exercise. And it should not feel inhibiting and I always tell my students and folks I work with around writing that, you know, this isn't required. You can make up your own exercise also. But you know, if this little prompt can help you to get started, then take advantage of it. So one prompt that I often use with folks who are actually in the hospital is to look out at the window and see what's happening outside. Take a minute, if you can get to the window, or even if you're not able to physically get right in front of the window, look and see what's happening. Observe a detail, whether it might be two people sitting down outside having lunch together, whether it might be a bird on a branch in a tree outside. Focus on some specific detail that you can observe outside your window, and imagine a story about it. And tell the nurse, if you want to imagine you're speaking to someone as you write. Tell your family member who you're looking forward to seeing later in the evening, who's coming to visit. Use that as a way, perhaps, to describe what you imagine is happening, and it can be, you know, something entirely imagined. It doesn't have to be a literal kind of story at all. Perhaps you imagine what the bird thinks of the hospital that's sitting out perched in that tree there. You know, what does a bird make of that? Who is the bird seeing lying in bed as the bird looks through the window at the person in the hospital bed? So you can really let your imagination go, and I think one of the reasons it's an effective kind of exercise is it helps get us out of that sort of perhaps lonely place where we're all by ourselves and we're isolated in our rooms. It gets us out into the world. It gets us thinking about what's happening outside of the perimeter of our hospital bed, and I think that can be a wonderful way to get started. So I encourage folks to give that a try.
Thank you so much for offering that writing prompt. And I also want to thank you for being on the show today, because it is an absolute honor to have you here. I think that your work just so beautifully shows the connection between writing and healing. And I would love for you to read a poem before you go. Would you do that?
Of course. Thank you so much for the invitation.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for coming.
Oh, it's been such a pleasure talking to you. Thank you. So this first poem is entitled Iatrogenic. And iatrogenic, I should perhaps define, as a condition that may be caused by the treatment itself. We refer to that as iatrogenic. You say, I do this to myself. Outside, my other patients wait. Maybe snow falls. We're all just waiting for our deaths to come. We're all just hoping it won't hurt too much. You say, it makes it seem less lonely here. I study them as if the deep red cuts were only wounds, as if they didn't hurt so much. The way you hold your upturned arms, the cuts seem aimed at your unshaven face. Outside, my other patients wait their turns. I run gloved fingertips along their course, as if I could touch pain itself, as if by touching pain I might alleviate my own despair. You say, it's snowing, Doc. The snow, instead of howling, soundlessly comes down. I think you think it's beautiful. I say, this isn't all about the snow, is it? The way you hold your upturned arms, I think about embracing you, but don't. I think we do this to ourselves. I think the falling snow explains itself to us, silent, beautiful, and so deeply wounding. Jane Doe number 2. They found her unresponsive in the street. Beneath a lamplight, I imagined, made her seem angelic, regal even, clean. She must have been around 16. She died who knows how many hours earlier that day, the heroine inside her like a vengeful dream about to be fulfilled. Her hands were crossed about her chest, as though raised up in self-defense. I tried to pry them open, to confirm the absence of her heartbeat, but in death she was so strong, as resolute as she was beautiful. I traced the track marks on her arms instead, then pressed my thumb against her bloodless lips, so urgent was my need to know. I felt the quiet left by a departing soul.
Now it's your turn to explore how writing can impact your life. If you have a notebook and pen, please get them now. If you don't have one, ask a staff or family member to contact the Center for Humanities in Medicine to get one for you. Call 507-266-3378 or email us at humanitiesrochester@mayo.edu. Since we've had the pleasure of listening to Dr. Campo today, this first writing exercise is to write a poem. Now, if you've never written a poem, do not panic. You're going to start with a very, very, very short kind of poem. It's called a haiku. A haiku is a 3-line poem that's easy to learn how to do. It doesn't rhyme, although it could if you wanted to play with that, and you can write about anything you want. The first line has 5 syllables, the second line has 7 syllables, and the third line has 5 syllables. That's it. So here are a few examples from Dr. Campo's book, The Enemy. Another day lit, from behind clouds, great gray brain, sky turned sentient. I love that one. Here's another one. What can we know but smallest pieces, tiny grains of truth? Just all that. So I'd like to map that out for you. What can we know but smallest pieces, tiny grains of truth? Just all that. See, 5, just all that. I promise you there are 5 on that last line. So are you ready? Describe an experience you're having now using haiku. To get started, you might use specific details to describe the facts of your current situation. Where are you? What's happening? Who's with you? Who have you met? How does the experience make you feel? Or you could write about a memory from your past. Close your eyes and really settle into it. If you're inside, what color is on the walls? Is there a plant in the corner? Do you smell anything? Really use your 5 senses to help you describe that memory with specific details. Once again, ask yourself, how do you feel in that moment? And put that emotional piece in there. Try writing about the memory in a series of haikus, or you can skip the poetry structure altogether and simply write it as it flows through your mind, like you're telling a story to a family member or a friend. Do whatever you feel comfortable trying, but I encourage you to put pen to paper or fingers to keyboard or screen, because as Dr. Campo said in his book, Desire to Heal, he was drawn to poetry because I can try to measure my experience with it. I can use it to plot graphs of my emotions so that I can hold them up later to study more carefully. And I can use it to harness the energy of the furiously pounding heart. Thank you so much for your time today. I'm Jacquelyn Fletcher. Talking about writing and healing is one of my very favorite things to do because I believe so strongly in the power of stories. You can reach me with any thoughts or suggestions or arrange to have a writer visit you in your room through the Center for Humanities by using the contact information on the screen. Thank you so much for tuning in to Healing Words.